Hello, my name is Meg Nimigon, and I am a leadership coach for women in senior leadership roles. And I want to welcome you to this episode of Inside Leadership with High Value Women. In this series, I'm hosting conversations with women who are leading at the highest levels, asking them hard-hitting questions to get to the bottom of what does it really take to lead at this highest level and in this new world of work. My guest today is Heather Milne. Heather is a journalist turned entrepreneur with nearly 20 years experience. Heather's worked on shows like City TV, CP24, and was part of the team that helped launch CTV's national morning show, Your Morning. I could go on about Heather's experience, but we will do that through our conversation together. So let's just dive in. Welcome, Heather. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Beautiful. Okay, so you've worked, as I mentioned, in some of Canada's top newsrooms, and you're leading teams in these fast-paced, I'm imagining deadline-driven environments. I'm curious, what are some of the key skills or qualities that stood out to you between the people who could thrive in that environment and the people who really struggled?
You know, Throughout my career, I learned pretty early on that a lot of what you have to do is just keep moving forward because the nature of TV and especially live TV is there is no time to stop, right? Like it's the nature of time in itself. So you have to make a decision and you have to move forward. And as we know in life and in work, sometimes decisions don't always actually go as we expect. And having that ability to pivot and continue moving forward, and that may be in a new direction, is something that's essential. And I think it's something too that we can use both in life and in work too, whether it's personal or professional.
That's so interesting because I think such a big problem that so many of us struggle with is having that momentum forward. We can get stuck overthinking or, be laboring a long decision. I'm curious, like when you first started out, like was that a barrier for you in terms of having to just keep moving forward? Like what was it like to do that shift, do you think, between, what we like to do is spend a lot of time to make decisions versus being someone who can just roll with the momentum, make decisions and pivot?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question because I think a lot of it is, as in a live news environment, you go into work and you're working toward a show. So say you are working on a 6 o'clock show, for example, you might start at like 9 or 10 a.m. and you have all that time until 6 to get stuff done. But when you're in the control room, and that was where I spent a lot of my career, was behind the scenes in the control room,
Okay.
you have finite time because you have, an hour to get the show to air and you don't have the luxury of time. You can't sit and think too long on something because if, say, for example, a guest is late or there is a report that you're waiting for and it's not going to make its slot, you have to reorder the lineup. You don't have, 20 minutes to think about it. You might have 20 seconds. And so, you know what? It sounds maybe really stressful and scary, but it's actually fun. And I think when I finally embraced it and just
Mm.
realized like this is how it is, and everybody in the control room is a part of the same team, and we're all working toward the same goal, which is a great show with a lot of really compelling information and what we would call maybe a clean skate, which is like no issues, no technical
Uh-huh.
issues. And so, just not overthinking it, which I think it, for a lot of people, myself included, is easier said than done. But when you're in that environment, headset on, in the control room, making the decisions, you just have to keep moving forward, literally.
Yes, I love this because it's like it's one of those examples of how we put ourselves into this zone where you have to do that, but then how can we apply it to areas that we don't actually have to do it, but would make our lives so much better? Like if we all had those treated time in that way, where we have an hour to do this, and this is what a lot of like coaching with my clients looks like, is like you have an hour to do it, you got to get it done in that hour. You don't get to have more time, right? This is the constraints that you dealt with. And I think imagine what it would be like if all of us thought about those moments as fun rather than stressful. It's actually fun to get to make decisions. It's actually fun to
Yeah,
be able to have a time constraint.
I think so. And I think now that I'm on the other side of the TV business and I'm watching it more now as a viewer, and I still block my time. So
Yes.
if I have a list, I'll be like, okay, I'm going to work on this task from 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. and I'll have my list. And then after 10 a.m., I have to shift to something else. So it's still kind of like
Yeah.
working against the clock, really. But then once you get there, you have to move forward to what's next. And I think even though it's not the same type of deadline, it's still a deadline that feels manageable and it's not overwhelming. And you can still almost force yourself to make decisions and then just move forward. Because, one day, very early on, like very early on in my career, someone told me, like, just decide. Doesn't matter what it is, you have to decide. And it's true,
Mhm.
right? Because if you spend too much time humming and hawing, you're just wasting time and that time that you've set out for yourself to accomplish something. So decide, commit to it, and then do it. And again, if it doesn't work out as you thought it might, that's okay. That
Mhm.
does happen, both personally and professionally. But being able to adapt and move forward in whatever that new direction is, with whether it's new challenges or whatever it might look like, just don't be afraid to keep going. Like it
Mhm.
can be overwhelming, I know, but once you do it, it's all good. It
Yes.
works.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like that is one of the secrets to success is learning that skill of committing to what you said you're going to do in a certain amount of time. And so it's such a
Hmm.
beautiful example of how you had to learn that, in a way where you didn't really have the option and now you have that skill for life, right?
Right.
Yeah. So because you've been working on these stories that are, developing in real time and you have to use, a team in order to produce them, you have to work collaboratively. I'm curious what secret might you have in terms of keeping your team aligned and focused when you're working in that type of environment?
A lot of my experience was not only a team environment, but it was also early morning hours, like really early. So the people that we would wake up quite literally in the middle of the night, depending on where we live, to get to work and work together was a really special environment. And I think working in that kind of scenario with people, you learn to be kind because
Mm.
we're all tired. And it, I think, adds another layer of stress. But to me, kindness was really big. And then also empowering people on the team, no matter at what level they were working, to feel as though they have a voice, because I believe that everybody on the team does. And I want to hear. So a lot of times we would talk about different stories or headlines, and I genuinely care what everybody on the team thinks about whether we were going to lead with story A or story B and why. Because what I see as important may not be what someone else sees as important. And I truly believe that television and news is a team sport, because it's important that many voices are heard and represented. Because the other thing is, too, people who are watching at home are not like me and they're not just like my colleague. And so I think it's important
Mm.
that it's collaborative and it's a kind and a safe space where people feel they can contribute. That was always my goal.
Yeah. Okay. So this, this simple fundamental of being kind to your team, caring for them, and then a genuine, not just like a checkbox check in with your team, but actually caring and taking their feedback into consideration. And you saw that those two things really helped people, all of a sudden, like let's just say like people disagreed, but because you took the time to bring everybody's perspective in the room, did you feel that helped shift into like alignment when the time came to actually move forward and commit to the decision?
Yeah, and I think, when everybody is on the same page, it just helps everybody move forward. And then the thing is too, again, with the environment that we worked in or that I worked in, everything changes all the time, right? So we could have one decision at 5:55, and by the time the show goes to air at 6 a.m., we might be looking at a different top story just by the nature of the world, right? And that's how things happen. And so if we know where we're going to start, it's easier to move things around, and everybody knows as a team what the plan was, and then very easily what it can become. And I think too, people feeling empowered to contribute and share and chime in just helps as well, because, there are so many moving parts. It's impossible to do it by yourself. You can't. And
Mhm.
so I think that's why it's really important for everybody to feel valued. And I think for me personally, operating in that way, it helped me feel valued as well as a contributing member of that team. Because even though I was taking the show to air and I was the coordinating producer for that show in the morning in the control room, it was really important that the writers and the directors and the people on the crew, everybody felt included.
Mhm.
And, the other thing is, it's, as I said earlier, it's a team sport, right? Beyond the kindness, I think we talked earlier about having fun. And I think that's also part of it, because it can be very heavy and it's hard and it's a grind a lot. I think if you're kind and you can laugh at least once during the
Mhm.
day, it goes a long way.
Yes. What beliefs or skills, we've talked a little bit about this, but what beliefs or skills helped you keep your own mind clear when you're working on these high pressure, tight deadline moments?
Well, I think being organized in terms of the skill is huge. I mean, we talked
Hmm.
earlier too, even now, about like time blocking and how like those things work post that part of my life.
Hmm.
But yeah, I think always being aware of what's going on and what's next. And, someone early on in my career told me you're only as good as your plan B. And so I made that my personal challenge to have way more than a plan B always. And that still applies in my personal and professional lives, because I think if you're not prepared, then you're going to be your own worst enemy because you cannot see the way forward. And we've talked about always moving forward, whether that's because
Hmm.
you're up against the clock of a deadline or the way you've structured your day. And I think that being prepared and seeing possible outcomes helps you, and it doesn't catch you off guard or flat-footed, and you can easily adjust to what's next. But being able to move forward and not get stopped, right? Because again, you're up against the clock. You only have a certain number of minutes in each block in the
Hmm.
3 hour or 1 hour or 30-minute show. And so being always able to pivot, which I don't love the word pivot, but it creates a visual, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just being able to adjust and adapt and also not lose your cool. And I think if you are prepared and
Mhm.
aware of possible other outcomes, when you face one, you can embrace it. Okay, here we are. Thought this might happen. Let's keep going.
Yeah, it's like that fine balance of being prepared and being willing to adapt and trusting yourself to be able to make those decisions in the
Hmm.
moment. I talk to my clients a lot about making decisions ahead of time and how powerful it can be to just, and it's reminding me of what you're talking about with the plan B. It's like if I've already decided these are the three things I could do if something goes wrong, then in the moment you're not just relying on like your survival instincts to make a decision, which might not turn out to be the best one. But this idea of
Exactly.
having a plan B ahead of time, I also think that's a beautiful way of looking at it.
Yeah, you're right. And I think and I'll just add, if you get into that kind of survival decision-making point, you're going to be frazzled by nature,
Yeah.
and it's going to be a decision that's made maybe not with as a clear head as otherwise if you are planned and like have the scenario mapped out ahead of time.
Yeah, exactly. You're giving yourself the best shot, right? Doing that thinking before
Hmm.
you even get in that position. So I know for you, you've mentioned like throughout your career, maybe not at the beginning, but throughout your career, you've actually worked with a lot of female-led teams and women leaders. The stats are still, not in our favor when we look at journalist positions and senior editorial roles, with just 27% of women holding those. But I'm curious about your own anecdotal experience about, your journey working in this field and how you have seen maybe a switch in terms of how women have, led the way versus maybe when you first started out.
Yeah, I think, as you say, when I first started, there were definitely more men in leadership positions. But as I grew within the industry and I worked in both Toronto and I also worked in Halifax, I saw an increasing number of women in leadership positions. And I think, early on, again, I keep talking back early on, but it's where a lot of learning happens, I think, in your career. And then it
Mhm.
shapes a lot of your decisions. And of course, your professional identity, I think, to a degree. But somebody told me, and it was a man, that I was too ambitious. And so I
Mhm.
took that again as a personal challenge to just
Mhm.
do better. And I think anytime that somebody says something to me and you reflect on it and you learn, it's a great way, I think, to grow. And I think through the experiences that I had, I was able to get into various positions within the newsrooms where I was interacting more and more with the senior leadership who are in many cases now women, which I also think is good because, I mean, we're women, but it allows for, again, I think a diversity of thought. And that goes back to what we were talking about earlier in, as a team leader and making sure that people on your team feel comfortable sharing their vision or their thoughts on different stories or segments or anything. And I think that having women and men contribute is important because again, everybody sees things differently and having a space for everybody, I think is important.
Yes, I'm so glad that you took that comment and used it as a reason to get better and not as a reason to, shrink down, which happens sadly a lot of the time.
Hmm.
So that's just another, example to those who are listening of taking those types of moments and that you really do have the choice in terms of how you want to use it, for you or against you. And I think like as we get more and more women into the senior position, leadership positions, we have to get really strong in those scenarios of not letting those comments take us down, but actually use them as fuel or be able to take care of ourselves on the other side of them. What has been an experience? This will be my last question, but what has been the experience in your career or an experience in your career that you felt shifted how you maybe led from that moment forward?
We talked earlier about kindness and how that's, I think, a really key pillar to leadership. And I will say, over the course of my career, I had amazing opportunities to travel to different parts of the country and meet people at really, really difficult moments for their communities.
Mm,
And one thing that I experienced in every single case was kindness. And
mm,
these people were faced with like unimaginable tragedy, and they still took time and spoke, and they welcomed us and into the community and shared stories, and there was still kindness throughout. And I think, at the heart of really, I think human connection is kindness. And I think it's really important because especially now, in a world where it's so easy to disconnect and not have face-to-face human interaction and scroll on your phone, doom scrolling. It's called
mm,
that for a reason. I
mhm.
think that seeking out the good and the positive, and even in the face of tragedy, there can be kindness. And I think it's just important to remember that that's always there, and to look for it, especially in leadership.
I love that you added that line, like, and to look for it, because it is always there. But sometimes when we're, stressed out or overwhelmed, we sometimes forget to look for the kindness. And then when we forget to look for it, then we forget to actually be kind ourselves. And so that's such a beautiful message to end on. I really want to thank you for taking the time, Heather. It's so interesting to hear your insights, especially to apply them to, positions across different industries where sometimes, we have this luxury of time, but it actually, gets people feeling stuck or taking on
Hmm.
they don't need to take on. And so having your perspective on it and giving ourselves permission, no matter what the actual, context we're working in is, there's so much that we can take from your experience and apply across whatever sector people are working in. So thank you so much for all of that.
You're welcome. Happy to do it.